Hey guys, welcome back to another live stream of the Assent on the Meaning of Catholic. My name is Angela Erickson. I am the show host here, and of course, next to me we have the infamous traditional Thomas, Nicholas Cavazos. Thanks for coming on tonight again, doing this thing again.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I actually was noticing this in the pre-show. It's funny because your like aesthetic background being kind of like a nice, dark, comfortable ocean blue, and then mine is essentially just like fluorescent light coming from the ceiling. I feel like though mine is like way warmer,
It
so
is.
mine should be like almost more of the feminine color that you would bring to it, whereas yours is more of the masculine color. So we're already into confusion
I know.
to this.
That's so funny. Well, I just like, because it's an evening show, I want it to look and feel a little bit more like an evening show. That's why I have the blasphemy music right at the beginning, the rock music. I think that's just
Yeah.
unheard of on MOC.
Yeah, I heard that if you like mute our intro, you gain a special indulgence or something like
Oh,
that. Something.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. I have to be so honest with everyone tonight. I'm not someone that really shies away from subjects necessarily, but I wasn't ever planning on necessarily doing a whole show on Pride Month or anything. Partly because I kind of feel like everyone is doing it. I mean, like, if I'm being totally honest, it's kind of like everybody is talking about it for obvious reasons, for good reasons. Um, and Fowler says to just mute the whole show. Fair. Wow, you're just skipping purgatory altogether, I think, my friend.
I'm surprised that Fowler can even hear the show with how old he is. It's just something it's very interesting to behold.
I'm probably almost the same age as Jacob.
No. You're very young. I think Fowler was born in like, I don't know. We were trying to figure out the other day on one of the shows like what generation movies they had watched. And we were finding out stuff like Stagecoach, like John Wayne's 1930s Stagecoach or something. Like he saw that in theaters or something.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So
That's impressive.
yeah,
Is he like a vampire or something? Because he doesn't look like he's aged a day.
no, I don't know if he's a vampire, but I mean, I probably if you read like de Lubac and Balthazar long enough, you start acting like a vampire. So that's just
Yeah.
the Thomas perspective, but it's
Yeah, no,
whatever.
that makes complete sense.
Mhm. Yeah, take it or leave it.
So going to the theme of the topic tonight, pride, homosexuality, the Pride Month. I'm just gonna say this super upfront. I actually have a sibling that is gay. And I love her to bits and pieces, and thanks be to God, we still have a wonderful relationship. She supports the work that I do. She actually supports me financially, even as a patron on my Patreon. She's all in on the work that I do, and I want to be sensitive to that. I would hate for her to come on here and um be extremely hurt by anything that is being said, uh, because I think that's not my goal here. And so I might not come down like fire and brimstone the way that I normally do, because this is one of those scenarios where I see in my personal life there's somebody there, right? Like this is I'm talking to somebody I love, in a way, and so I just wanted to be upfront about that. If people are like, I don't know, just not used to my normal tenor of speaking and tone, because this is a different issue for me right now, especially as I watch my sister make her way back into the church right now. There's something really special going on, and I want to be sensitive to that at this time. So I hope that makes sense to people, because I think the way that we talk about this issue, especially, is like this is how we're going to start bringing people back to the church and drawing them back to the truth, because I do think even members within the LGBTQ whatever, they're seeking to, like they're like the rest of us, they're seeking to, and yeah, I guess that's all that I'll say on that for at this moment. Do you have any thoughts on that before we sort of dive in? And I know I'm not the only one, like Mac here too, he's in a similar situation. So I just want to be sensitive to that. I think a lot of us are in this position right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because it's one of those, it kind of touches upon that famous debate of like, what's the best way to evangelize a person? And, St. Thomas, he gives an analogy or excuse me, not an analogy, but an example where it's in the beginning of his Prima Pars, where he says, basically, depending on whom you're trying to convert, you may use certain tools that are at your disposal. So he gives the example that, like, for instance, if you're this is in his day, but if you're evangelizing a pagan, use Aristotle. If you're evangelizing a Hebrew, use the Old Testament. If you're evangelizing a heretic, use the New Testament. We can obviously take that, but then we can also extrapolate out from that and then apply those same principles to our own day. And so I think when it comes to our day, we have to balance two extremes, in my opinion. The one extreme, and this extreme, I honestly just don't really think like really exists, at least in the Western world, to the degree that at least proponents on the left are going to assert, is like, everybody is Westboro Baptist Church who just like disagrees with homosexuality. You know what I'm saying? Like that caricature, which I just don't think is accurate at all. I think that represents like a very small percentage of people who probably have some deeper underlying issues that are causing them just to lash out at the world. And then there's I would say the majority camp on the other end of the spectrum, which is either going to endorse that said action, or B, say they don't endorse that said action, but the way that they speak about it, they just never speak about it.
100%. Yeah.
Or it's kind of like, okay, I ate a soggy sandwich. I don't feel like I got any meat out of this.
Well, I think it reminds me a lot, not interrupt you. I mean, kind of, because I guess I am interrupting you. But I mean, I sort of see a commonality between people who say, like, I'm not personally pro-choice, like I would never personally have an abortion, but I don't feel like I can tell other people what they can and cannot do with their bodies, or who they can and cannot love, right? There's kind of this similar libertarian mindset, I guess you could say, where people feel like they're not necessarily allowed to have an opinion on this, when that's just not true. Like, we have to make moral judgments all the time, and there's nothing wrong with making a moral judgment about something. That doesn't mean you can judge necessarily the state of someone's soul. I think that's different. Yeah. You work on that camera. There we go. So yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, exactly. You want to make sure that you're speaking truth and charity, and truth and charity are never going to be things that are going to be diametrically opposed, because at least in the Thomistic framework, which I believe to conform with objective reality, charity is going to be, as we all know, if you're a practicing Catholic, right, to will the good of another, at least in this practical context, the virtue of charity. But when we say to will the good of another, what we mean by that is that we will the good of another for that other person's sake. And goodness itself is God. And so what we're willing for that person is union with God. However, we can, if we're willing someone to have union with God, we obviously cannot put a stumbling block in their way and, lie to them and tell them that, an action that they could be committing is against reason as well as divine revelation. That would be a very unloving thing to do. So, yeah, I think it depends on time and place. Generally speaking,
and the relationship. Yes.
In the relationship, I've generally found, at least in my own personal experience, that individuals that have opened up to me and told me their struggles with this, I've had a series of 3 or 4 individuals over the course of my 25 years on earth tell me these things. And what I found is that every time that I actually just listen to them and then just be like, thanks for telling me, here's truth, it always turns out great. It always just turns out great. And unless they're a person that's just very unreasonable in the sense that they're just not wanting to listen, you just telling them straight up and kind of not apologizing for it, I think goes a long way. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to be yelling at a person. Maybe you do in a very minute context, but for 99% of us, probably not. You just speaking the truth is just going to go a long way, and not giving in to anything.
Yeah, I think people are looking for the truth right now. Everybody. I mean, it's just, there's so many people looking for the truth right now. I think the last couple of years have really sort of put everything we believe under a microscope, for a lot of people, who just have been blindly going through life, not thinking about much, just floating to the next thing. The
Mhm.
last couple of years have really all of a sudden called what we consider reality into question. I think a lot of people are sort of falling into this existential crisis of what is life? What is my life? And where can I find the truth? And I think that's partly why we're seeing younger generations in some ways swing back to a more conservative mindset, is because all of a sudden they're seeing progressivism doesn't fall down a road that I want to go down. Like, these people are not happy. They're clearly very angry and things are falling apart. Why is that? And I look at the church and I think this the church is a stalwart institution that has withstood war, famine, persecution, all kinds of stuff. And it remains to stand in contradiction to the secular world. And strongly so. I mean, yeah, that we have our own issues right now, but altogether, there is no other institution that has stood up for the dignity of the human person the way that the Catholic Church has, sexual morality the way that the Catholic Church has, these timeless truths that speak to our ontology, our teleology, all of the
Mhm.
things, our very nature and essence. And I think that people in the gay community, so to speak, they're attracted to it too. Like, they're attracted to beauty, they're attracted to goodness, they're attracted to truth. And so what's the best way that we can convey that to them? Because yeah, I think, let's see, it was 20, oh, made it, oh, he's scorched earth now. Okay, sorry, I got distracted. I thought he was talking about contraception. I think the introduction of contraception and the dissemination of it really um, put homosexuality on a fast track, because it sterilized
Mhm.
it sterilized the natural end of the sexual act. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Hey, Haley.
Yeah, no, I agree fully. I think, generally speaking, yeah, so progressivism, communism, leftism, it's all just, you know, as Jeremiah would say, steaming trash, if you will. And I agree. It is just steaming trash. And people just need to tell it like it is, because honestly, I am so sick and tired of I've grown up in this world where I've seen so many adults who try to play this game, and they know it deep down in their conscience that this is wrong, but they play this game where they don't see, they may just maybe, like, so the average conservative may disagree with communism but doesn't see it for what it is, which is an
Mm-hmm.
actual threat to society, like a legitimate dangerous threat.
Yeah.
Whereas, and then therefore, a lot of, unfortunately, young people get sucked down into that rabbit hole, and they start to embrace these either lifestyle choices or philosophical ways of thinking. And before you know it, they're super unhappy. There's some good videos. Actually, everyone in the chat, what you guys should do is, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching this later, sometime just go into an open tab, go into YouTube and just type in before and after woke. And what you'll find is dozens of videos of young people, and they'll show the photos side by side of, like, these very attractive guys and girls. They're in high school,
Mm-hmm.
junior high, right? They're looking fit, they're playing basketball, right? They're going to prom, they look great. And then they go into college and they take the photos after college. They're all like super bleached pale, piercings everywhere,
They
tattoos
don't
everywhere,
look happy.
blue
Mm-hmm.
hair, pink hair, and they're just angry. And what it is it all goes back to what St. Thomas talks about in his treatise on the virtues, where he says that depending on whether or not a soul practices vice or virtue, it will not only obviously heal the soul, but it's actually even going to affect the body. Like, if you guys know really holy people, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's like a certain glow that they give off, like very holy people.
Yeah,
And
yeah, they do.
he talks about that, like that is a real thing, that virtue, it makes sense when we talk to, say, for instance, a person who's really addicted to substance abuse, right? Whether that be alcohol or hard drugs or something like that. That obviously has a physical toll on the body, right? And then that can quickly deteriorate the body. Well, what about virtue? Virtue is going to give the body a certain vigor and lacklusterness, where they can be, you meet these 90-year-old nuns and they're just glowing and they seem very young. It's just like, how is this
Mm-hmm.
possible? So what I
Yeah.
want I want my generation to stop drinking this Kool-Aid, and thankfully, we're starting to see. I think this year more than ever, I think that this is the Pride year to end Pride years, or Pride month to end Pride months, rather. because from Bud Light sales being down month over month, to Target losing over $20 billion of stock, to school walkouts, high schoolers and junior hires walking out of schools
In liberal school environments,
in
yeah.
Massachusetts and California, leaving class, saying hilarious things like "my pronouns are USA, make America great again." Where I saw this video the other day, I put it up on my social media. People should follow me on my social media because you'll get some spicy stuff throughout the week that would probably not fly with the other hosts of Meeting Catholic, but that's why we're all different.
Now I'm curious. I feel like I'm not keeping good enough tabs on you.
Mine is just like, yeah,
You're fired.
I'm very political on my social media, but
Oh,
I
so
was
am
showing
I.
this video and I was
Yeah.
just absolutely laughing because there's this video where these people are walking out of one of these schools where they're being told to show up in Pride merchandise. And what they're doing is they're like holding Bibles up as they're being interviewed. Like this is some edgy thing. And this is what the edgy thing is now for young people. It's just like, yeah,
Mhm.
get married young, have a Bible, go start a farm somewhere. And that's just what's hilarious. And you see this on a mass scale. You even see
Yeah.
massive corporations like the Major League Baseball, NASCAR, Xbox, even Starbucks, right, taking down their Pride merchandise, taking down their Pride logos. I see it even in the protests. Way fewer people going, way fewer places publicizing these things. They're only doing it online. They're not doing it in person anymore. So the tide is shifting. The tide is turning. The pendulum is swinging back. You even see that in statistics in the latest
Mhm.
Gallup
Yeah.
polls that young people are becoming more socially conservative, truly socially conservative, not libertarian, but socially conservative.
But are they coming back to the church? And that's my next question because I mean, at least when we're talking about this, we're kind of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. But are they coming back to church? Because I recently interviewed Dr. Mary Eberstadt on her book, Adam and Eve After the Pill Revisited. And it's a great
Yeah.
interview. Go listen to it if you haven't on my channel. But she also has another book called How the West Really Lost God. And that is a phenomenal read. And it talks about the interplay of families settling down. And a lot of families stay in church when they have families and they start having kids. They want to raise their kids up in a moral framework. And they know that the church is a place to do that. And because people are waiting longer to get married, they're not having as many kids. You're seeing the end of Christianity. We have seen in a lot, we are in a post-Christian world.
Mhm.
But what I find interesting is that as we see this pendulum swing, it's like you are seeing all of those old values coming back.
Mhm.
That's why you have like the trad wife phenomenon, which is a whole nother thing. Maybe someday we can talk about it because I've got things to say on that too. But um but the other thing that I've noticed is that it seems to me that these young people still are fairly nihilistic. Like I haven't seen their worldview and how the world should operate is shifting to a more conservative perspective, but they're still very nihilistic. Um,
Yeah, it's shifting to stoicism.
yes.
It's leaving nihilism and uh, debauchery, essentially hedonism. That's what I'm trying to think of. It's leaving nihilism and hedonism, and it's going to stoicism. And the reason that it's doing that, as I'm seeing, is and not going to answer your question, like, are they going to the church or not? Of course, there are going to be people who are going to the church. I meet them
Hmm.
right at the TLM.
Yeah.
You meet a lot. I've met so many converts there, so many young men that have been coming there, single young men that are coming there, and things like that, who are, wanting to be priests or wanting to, become holy and get their life together and things like that. But, to use a source that maybe would be a bit unexpected from coming from me, but and no dissing him, but like for instance, Bishop Robert Barron, shout out to him for actually talking about an issue that I'm very passionate about, which is the fact that the church, and he agrees, has not done a good job at all at witnessing specifically to young men. And
Hmm.
when he was asked about, in this, it's a very recent interview, you can check it out on Word on Fire. He talks about how when we look at young men, we see the young men really start to deteriorate from the church 60 years ago. And he says, why? Now, he and I aren't going to necessarily pinpoint the exact same causes, but they're very similar. He's going to say, when we conform all of our music to being very sappy, when we start
Yeah,
having
that's bad.
all of our Bible studies and catechesis and sermons overtly and I think even theologically erring, talking about the love of God. It's all about the love of God. And I think it's a misunderstanding of the love of God, but it's all about the love of God,
Mhm.
the dignity of man, how amazing you are. And then you get men into these Bible studies where you're all looking at each other and you're like, open up to me. How's your heart? Things like that. Guys are annoyed. And I remember growing up in non denominationalism and experiencing the same thing, thinking, this is so cheesy because I want to be challenged. I want to become a man.
Yeah.
The problems that are in my life, and I feel like the guys that are in my life, we're all struggling with similar things, and that the people who are above us, whether that be the youth pastor, the senior pastor, whatever, it's just not registering with them. And so you see a
Mhm.
lot of people going over to the Jordan Peterson crowd and things along that. And there's a lot of merit that you can obviously find in there. There's obviously going to be points of disagreement, like real disagreement, but the church has a great opportunity right now. She has a wonderful opportunity to reach out to men,
Yes.
challenge men, and thankfully, I love Bishop Barron's solutions. He was like, "We need to start talking about sin again in sermons. We actually need to be given hard penances again. We got to talk about virtue." But what are we talking about on a global stage? Without getting into too much of the weeds, it's like when we read the synodal documents and you see all of the emphasis is how can we have women participate more? And it's not about young men at all, and no young men are
Mhm.
coming at all. And I'm like, okay, essentially,
That's
aside
why you have more people becoming more men choosing transgenderism in part, I think. Like all of a sudden men are way better at being women than women are, I guess. It's like they can throw on some lipstick and a dress and get some implants and all of a sudden they're women and they're breaking barriers and that like fake glass ceilings, all of a sudden they're amazing. They went from being, third rate swimmers to all of a sudden winning championships and being all over the cover of Vogue magazine or Elle or something else. It's like, yeah, what wouldn't be attractive about that to somebody who's really struggling interiorly with their identity and wanting some acknowledgement? That would be
Mhm.
very appealing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, yeah, for us to start off, I think with these 2 points as we kind of now get into pride, it's like on the one hand, we have to understand how we're supposed to talk. I think that the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which I have a lot of criticism for, believe it or not, unsurprising for a Thomist, it's more of a language thing with me more than anything else.
Hmm.
But I think it speaks really well to this issue because it does strike a balance. It talks about how, on the one hand, it is a objective evil. It's an objective, grave evil to practice those things, right? We have to make a distinction between a person who is suffering from same-sex attraction versus a person who acts out on that attraction. So that action in and of itself would be sinful. Um, but then also balancing that with a good pastoral walk and helping those individuals and walking with them is important. That's our first foundation. Second foundation is like there's a lot to be white pilled about, but the church needs to get on her game. Like that's just something that we all have to recognize. Like we need to get on our game, not just about homosexuality, but just about the swath of people, whether it be, all the young girls who are going to OnlyFans and these horrible websites thinking that that's where they're going to find love or money, or all these young guys going off into hardcore stoicism or paganism because every time we look at the church, it's just, hippy dippy. I have a guitar up here. Come with my jamboree. Like
Hmm.
it's so cringe.
It is. We had to go to a Novus Ordo parish this weekend, and it's very local to me, and we know a lot of the people there, and so it's always a little awkward when people are like, "How come we never see you at mass?" And we tell them we drive to go to mass somewhere else, even though this parish is a mile from our house.
Hmm.
And yeah, the guitar. It was super weird last night. I noticed it's a beautiful church. It's incredibly beautiful. It looks more like a Eastern Orthodox, like or Greek Orthodox church. It's beautiful. And but you have somebody in there with the guitar and no one is singing. Like it's so weird. So it's super disjointed every time I go there. And this is not to put in like a shameless plug, but this is why I started my podcast is integrated is because so much of our lives are disintegrated, right? Like they're fractured. And I think that's a has a lot to do with the discontentment we're seeing and why
Yeah.
people are choosing to do because they don't understand who they are and they don't know how to express in an exterior fashion their interior, or vice versa, right? Like God gave us bodies. He made us carnationals, incarnate in some way. We have this human body so that we could express in an exterior way our interior dispositions. And people don't even know how to cultivate an interior disposition that is properly ordered towards God. And so then they can't express it properly. And so all of a sudden you see this stuff that's really disjointed. Like this beautiful church is incredible. And then the laity are like so disinterested, and the music is just the musician is a beautiful singer, but the music is not
Doesn't
reverent and regal. It's not drawing the heart up to heaven, and you're not sitting there going, wow, God is here. It's like, no, this is an attempt at praise and worship music. Like, this is not making me think, wow, this is holy, holy,
Mhm.
holy, holy. This is not, it's so disjointed. And people go up for communion and they walk right out the door. They don't even go back to their pew. It's
Mhm.
unbelievable. And you're like, you just received the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, and you're just walking out of the church. You just popped your vitamin for the week, and then you're out of here. And that's what I think too is happening with homosexuality and all of these other issues. It's like we're so disintegrated, we're so disjointed, and we're conflicted interiorly in all of these different inclinations that we have, and no one's helping us
Mhm.
properly order those towards God. And then you have the culture. It's like if the church is informing you, somebody's going to.
Yeah,
Somebody's
exactly.
going to farm you. It's going to be the world. And what does the world want? What does the king or prince of the world want? Satan, prince of the world. He would want you to do anything contrary to God. He's
Mhm.
going to entice you in that direction. And so I think you're right. We as a church right now have an incredible opportunity to stand against what is going on right now in the world, because the church has the truth. It has everything to offer these people, all of us who are hurting. It's a hospital for those of us who are sick, and we all are.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're gonna do real quick for everyone who's watching, if you guys haven't liked the video, please do so right now. And if you haven't subscribed to MOC, which I'm gonna
Please
assume
do.
99% of you guys have, please do. But also go ahead and share this, because sharing this video is actually going to be one of the best ways in helping not just this apostle group, but specifically even this show and our two shows. So put it on Facebook, Instagram, True Social, Twitter, whatever you guys use. You guys know how to do it, hopefully. I don't know. I don't know how old everyone is in here. Maybe you're 4 and you're like, I don't know how I got on here. I was looking for something else.
I
Um,
understand. And
maybe,
Des, I also want to let you know I have your question on the docket. We will address it here at some point this evening.
yeah, I was actually about to say what we
Okay.
can do. We have for you guys a clip that we're wanting to show in a little bit, but maybe before we show the clip, what we
Mm-hmm.
can do is maybe address maybe 2 or 3 of like the big common responses that we hear,
Mm-hmm.
because this is it. Oftentimes, like with everything, unfortunately, things come down to word games, right? They come
Mm-hmm.
down to word games, and usually sloganeering is what takes place.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, maybe we should start off real quick. Well, maybe let's hit maybe the argument, love is love,
Mm-hmm.
and if you could add on to that, is like what's against just people loving each other. So,
Yeah. Who are you to judge?
yeah, who are you to judge? Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna try to steel man this just off the top of my head. If I was a proponent of this lifestyle, at least the way I've heard that this has been articulated is this: you have your religion, right? You have your religion. I'm not telling you you can't practice your religion, but love is love. You can't help whom you love. You can't help the way you're born, and therefore, to say that you can't love somebody because of your specific religious beliefs is imposing upon someone else something that is against their nature, is against just who they are as an individual. Who are you to say you can go against that? Plus, your religion seems to preach all about love. Why would you want to prevent that? And why are you
Mm-hmm.
acting antithetical to that action? I'm sure you've heard arguments that are somewhat like this before.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. What would be some of your just initial thoughts on that argument, or just on maybe in general the phrase "love is love"? What are your general thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my initial thought is I think it's really important. how we define love itself, because, as you know, even the Greeks articulated that there are different types of love, right? We experience different kinds of love, and that's good. Like, I don't want to love my husband the same way I love other people in my life. I'm just saying. And I think it's a very reductionist, simplistic way to view this issue. And that's so common, right? Like, everything needs to be sterilized and sort of reduced in the culture war for these sloganeering propaganda type things. And that's important because language shapes our perception. That's why they do it. I studied communications in college, and we talked about how different symbols change over time. And it's in large part because of language and how language changes, like the rainbow flag, for example.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example, is that over time these things change, and that's why it's important that you stand firm in the how things are properly defined. And so I think my first response would be something along the lines of, I think we need to have a conversation about what love is. Like, what do you think love is? And then I'll explain to you what I think love is, because I think, like you do, that love means to will the good of another, and it's not rooted in our feelings, but actively willing that someone else become holy and attain eternal salvation. That's how I view love. What do you think about that? I think that's my first and fundamental response, because having a love is love slogan really opens up that door, Pandora's box, for just utter depravity. And I think you can find a lot of common ground there with people who are in support of homosexuality, and because I think most of them do not agree with where we are headed and the whole movement at large right now. I think even the LGBT stuff is just being hijacked by really weird demonic movement within transgenderism, specifically. But that's in my opinion an outgrowth of homosexuality. It's not surprising at all that the slippery slope came true as was predicted.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, the phrase "love is too ambiguous for me. I think it's something that at the end of the day, I mean, everyone in the audience, just think of it this way: a simple phrase, "Love is love." Okay, let's break that down. What is the etymology of love? What does love mean, right? And that's what you just pointed out. Like, what do we mean in our definition in terms of love? And the problem is, again, is what most people in common day America, as well as Western Europe, associate love with is going to be fundamentally a feeling. That is how most of us were raised. I'm part of the, growing up watching Disney generation, right?
Oh man.
So
Yeah, me
like,
too.
think it's like most of us, when we think of love, we kind of associate that with romance. That's
Yeah.
just kind of our default. Now, of course, as we grow older, we can learn about others and we can make nuanced arguments of this and that. But we just have to understand that the person on the street, when you say the word love, is probably 9 times out of 10 going to think of something romantic related. So when we break down love is love, we first have to understand that love is not an emotion, though an emotion can accompany love.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
love is fundamentally a choice. And let's pit these two sides against each other for a moment. Although, again, they can still technically be one. But let's pit them against each other for a moment. If love is just an emotion, right, then the phrase, well, I fell out of love with him or her, and therefore divorce is completely okay, or you just or
There's
break.
no spark anymore. You
There's no
hear that?
spark
There's no
anymore.
spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it just falls apart. But then really examine that. Did you just love him or her based off of what you could get out of it? Right? So you see that phrase, if it's just purely emotion, you see it's so rooted in selfishness. It's about what can I get? And so therefore, when you hear love is love now, and love means in this context, emotion, well, it means my emotion of feeling good inside towards another person should therefore be manifest no matter how it should go. But then at the end of the day, like, if I just don't have this emotion anymore, I can leave, right? And there's no commitment, there's no solid rock in this. And so it makes it very cold, because then it's just like, well, is love just a chemical reaction going off in your head?
Mhm.
Husbands out there, tell your wife, yeah, I have a chemical reaction towards you, and that's about it. See how far that will go, right? It's not, it's not going to go very well, right? Um,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
I think prepping for heaven, you are so right. And I will say though, just as a and I want to be clear though too, we're not saying that people don't deserve to be loved. Like you have dignity. God loves you. You do deserve love and you deserve to be treated well, but you know, for anyone who's been married any number of years, I'm going on almost 10 years now, and I met my husband when I was 17. There's some times where it's like it just doesn't feel good. You know, like marriage is hard. It's you're not always going to agree on things. You're going to have difficult moments based on just so many different things, like having kids, and that can be really challenging for a multitude of reasons. Or maybe you're struggling with infertility, and that's a whole nother thing. It's not always going to feel good, but are you committed to
Mhm.
helping get the other person to heaven, and are you treating them with dignity the best that you can, with just our frail human faculties?
Yeah. Or even, let's just say, for instance, just to even steel man it further, let's say a person doesn't necessarily believe in God, or they don't understand heaven fully, right? But
Right.
they, let's just say then, therefore, that love is a choice, right? If we pit love as a choice against the idea of love as just an attraction based off of a chemical reaction or feelings, then it can be rooted in so much more, because we realize that fundamentally this means that I am going to be having to give myself over in self-sacrificial actions. So whenever I
Mhm.
quote, lose the spark, I don't leave. I have to maintain that. I have to not just be creative and stoking the flames of that, but also at the same time, I also have to be willing to be like, yeah, I can't have what I want all the
Mhm.
time. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. You can probably tell the light bulb went off. You know, I think so much of this marriage is and love itself, it's like any other relationship, just like our relationship with God. You know, we have times of desolation and consolation. And if you just leave and walk away, it's a lot harder to get back into a strong prayer life. If you like that commitment that you cultivate in times of consolation and continuing that in times of desolation bears so much fruit because it is a death to yourself, for the good of that relationship and drawing near to our Lord in this unique way. And I feel like every time my husband and I have struggled with something in our lives where things were just off and disjointed, persevering through that, and it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe how much I love you. We just that
Mhm.
love is transformed in suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why when we realize that, and we realize that love is a choice, and that we have to think about the actions that we do, we have to exercise prudence, what we
Mhm.
realize is that love is going to be rooted in reason. So therefore, when
Mm.
we go back to the initial statement, love is
Yeah.
love, we have to approach it with that perspective of, is this reasonable? And so therefore, when we examine homosexual actions, which I don't want to say too much about it because we'll get
Right.
into in the video in a little bit, we have to ask ourselves the question, does this statement, love is love, really make rational sense, which we'll get into. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's a great thing to start off with.
Yeah. Do you think we should dive into the video now and start looking at it and sort of
Yeah.
picking it apart? We'll just I haven't watched all of it yet. It's a little bit long, but we're going to pause it at different moments, and if there's any point of discussion, Nick, feel free to stop me. We're just going to throw this up here and
Yeah, let me
uh
tell everyone what this is. So
yes,
this
you preface this.
Yeah, so this comes from the great show Timcast IRL. I actually really enjoy this show mainly because Tim Pool, he is kind of what you would just call a disaffected classical liberal slash somewhat libertarian-esque. But he has a great Catholic who's on his show called Seamus, who I'd actually really like to meet one day. He sounds like a Thomas, so I think we'd hang out and have a good time. But he also has a lot of other secular people on. And so what I enjoy about the show is that he talks a lot about current culture issues, which is what I'm passionate about and what I'm passionate about getting into in the future. And so, but I was listening to this from the other day, from one of his shows the other day, and I didn't tell you this actually when I sent this to you, but what ends up happening in this episode is there's a moment where it's all cool, but whenever I heard this omission come out from where secular conversation has gotten to, where they're so Catholic now, but they just don't understand it, I was screaming and like laughing so hard. And so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna go through this slowly, comment on it. It's 11 minutes in total, but we're gonna just commentate on it. And if you guys have any questions, put them in the comment section. It might be a good idea to put maybe like 3 question marks behind it, so that kind of like lights it up for us. And like this, or you can preface it with some multiple question marks. That might help too. So yeah, whenever you're ready, and feel free again to stop whenever you want, and we'll commentate on it.
Yeah, this we're just gonna hit play. All right. See if I can get the ride.
No group has done more harm to gay people than gay activists, and you can change that for lesbian, trans. You know, I've been on the show a bunch. The audience knows I'm married to a dude. I don't really care about it. No one cares. But we were talking the other night, like we were out in the field doing something in the farm. And Andrew, my better half, who doesn't talk, he's pretty quiet, farmer, and he was like, "Remember 10 years ago when like no one cared?" And he's like, "Isn't it miserable?" He was like, "I've never." Wow. He's like, and we're in our 40s. He's like, "I've never been more embarrassed to be gay than I am right now." Wow. And we live on a farm in the middle of nowhere. He's like, "It's just miserable." I'm like, "No, I get you." He's like, "It is miserable." He's like, "It's just miserable." I mean, so no one has hurt gay people more than gay activists. And I wouldn't put the trans movement as the head of that, but like honestly, 10 years ago it was so much easier. Like people would be like, "Oh, it's Pride Month," and like, yeah, for a second, like, yeah, I don't care. Like, just leave me alone.
So I just want to comment and say, yeah, I still remember when things were really starting to get, we're voting and starting to vote on this issue and legalizing gay marriage. And there was a huge push, but it was nothing like it is today. I mean, it is crazy how fast this has become almost all consuming for our culture. I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just because I'm aware of things going on politically, and maybe no one else notices, but I don't know how you would not notice the way that this is getting shoved down our throats. And I think people are getting really sick of it.
Yeah, real quick to comment on the last comment that was given from LIX. We're not platforming homosexuals. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're engaging content, and in order to actually be able to be a good apologist inside of your society, you actually have to engage their content. Doesn't mean that you agree with them. We're not platforming or recommending this said individual. What we're doing is we're commentating on this person's experience, and you're going to see in this video the Catholic host respond to this gentleman's arguments from the perspective of Thomistic reason. So again,
we've spent a half an hour talking about how we don't agree with
you don't want to get into an isolationistic box, and I'm not accusing you of that.
No,
it's like if you get into this box where you're just not willing to engage what leftists and communists are saying, then we're never going to win this culture war. And that's
and how many of us, I mean, this is everywhere now. I mean, it's just everywhere. Like in our own relationships, as I talked about at the top of the hour, it's like my sister is in a gay quote unquote marriage. And, it's like these people are in our lives. You can't just shut them out and pretend that they don't exist. We're not saying that this is great, but anyway.
But anyway, comment on to what you just said earlier. Fully agree. I would say like, growing up again, I remember in 2014 when homosexuality was quote unquote legalized. And I remember obviously being fairly upset about it, but there was not really any major pushback.
No, there was like none. That was part of the problem.
Yeah, and most of the pushback was mainly based off of, and I know that I'm saying this on a religious podcast, was mainly based off of religious groups. And while that's not necessarily bad, the problem in a practical apologetics is that if you go to someone who doesn't believe in the Bible and you quote to them the Bible, it's not necessarily going to be convincing. In the same way that, for instance, when I go to Muslim countries, which I have, and done evangelism illegally to Muslims, then if someone was to come up to me with the Quran and say, like, you're disobeying the Quran, let me show you, it wouldn't matter to me because I don't believe in the Quran. You have to first start off with the level of reason, something we all have in common, right? And then you go from the perspective of reason. And so I would agree with you. I think that, like, it has been shoved down our throats way too much. And that's what it was. Let me respond to this guy's gentleman's comment. I don't know if you're a gentleman or not, so forgive me if I'm
misgendering you.
to be
ironic.
Yeah, I mean, we're not. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily. It would depend on what that individual is saying, but I mean, I'm of the perspective of, like, yes, if you want to combat something, please do combat it. I mean, you see, for instance, in the, like, if we were to take this logic, we see the popes openly quote the errors of Luther, right? We see, for instance, also in the syllabus of errors, quoting large percentages of public error. We see even in the condemnation of Mustache Man's thought, because we're here on YouTube. Mustache Man's thought, he quotes from him, and it's not necessarily trying to put them on a platform, but it is exposing people to what is out there, just because we need to understand, like, what they believe. And that's, especially for someone as a Thomist, I gotta understand what that person's believes so that I'm not misrepresenting them, because if I'm misrepresenting them, then they're just going to say, well, you don't know anything about what I believe, and walk away. So I'm not saying that you're doing that. Again, it's all cool, but it's just something to consider for everyone. Like, it is good to really try to hone in our perspectives, if you will. And so, yeah, those are just my thoughts on that.
Well, let's move on.
But I don't think it's gay activists. I think it's leftists.
Well, yeah, but leftists. But
leftists in general. Well, these are white liberal women.
That's true. They've used us the way they've used BLM, the black people to push BLM, the way they've used Greta Thunberg to push green issues, right? It's just miserable. Like, the best thing you could do to celebrate Pride Month is just shut up. Leave it alone. And I do agree with you. When they started bringing in the kids, it's when people like Andrew and I were like, we want nothing to do with this. Oh my God, this is so freaking weird and disgusting and perverted.
And now
I find it so interesting that he sees that, but there's a disconnect between, like, what we've talked about already, that love is not really, that's just stupid. That's just stupid propaganda. But that he doesn't see the connection between love is love and the active push for pedophilia and grooming that is happening in large part because of not just this, it's the sterilization and the divorcing of sex from its natural end, which is children. And by doing so, making sex merely about sexual gratification. And then you throw pornography into the mix. And of course, naturally, you're going to have some of the most perverse stuff on the planet happening, because that is what is coloring people's brains.
Yeah, no, notice how, as you were saying, like, when it comes to pornography and other issues, they see everything through the lens of physical pleasure. Whereas just a second ago, when we were talking about love is love, if love is just an emotion, it's all about personal emotional pleasure. So notice how so much of the movement, and this, you can apply this, of course, to every single heterosexual sin as well, is that it's all sin in general. It doesn't even have to be specifically about this particular species. It's all self-focused, and that's the problem, is that love, again, is going to be you choosing to go outside of yourself and want the best and the good for the other. Or to phrase it another way, it's like, it's the giving of oneself to another person, whether that be, marriage, or, you just give yourself to a friend by listening to them, or giving yourself to a homeless person by giving them money and hanging out with them or something, And so, yeah, there is a philosophical disconnect that I agree with you, that I just don't see that they're having, where it's that they don't realize that if we divorce human sexuality from its primary scientific end, which is going to be reproduction, then logically speaking, anything can follow after that. And to say, well, no, this is immoral, that's immoral. But if you don't, is there really any leg to stand on if you don't think, like, if human sexuality is not about, first and foremost, right? It's not the only end, but first and foremost, the reproduction of rearing of children, then it's kind of like, well, what leg do you really have to stand on with anything else?
You don't, and I think that's one of the saddest parts about the sexual revolution and the normalization of contraception and abortion, because that was really the crux that laid the foundation to equal the playing field to legitimize homosexual behavior in a way that was previously impossible.
Yes.
And so I think that relationship there often is overlooked as well, because you have people who are Protestant, for example, who are very avidly pro contraception and sometimes even pro abortion, but they might be opposed to homosexuality. It's like no. These are two lungs breathing side by side. These are wings of the same bird, and of course they're egregious. And that's not to say, I mean, I know many women who are post-abortive, and it's like, of course, all these things can be redeemed. I want to be hopeful in that, and I think people are searching for that right now. They're thirsting to be connected to something eternal and true, because they're seeing that these are dead ends, physically and spiritually. They are dead ends, and so that's why I think it's important we talk about it. Like, I want to provide hope for people. I don't want to just get out here like guns blazing, whatever. But we have to be honest about the philosophical roots of all of this. We have to be honest about where these things originated, and that they do lead to dead ends for people physically and spiritually.
Yeah. Ipo Rose 1. Sorry, I'm like the worst at reading off the YouTube names, but you're absolutely right. A couple,
Alfred Kinsey, Dr. John Money.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with Alfred Kinsey and Dr. John Money,
watch What Is a Woman.
What Is a Woman, and then do like a deep dive, but not too deep because it's really dark.
Yeah, big warning. If you really want to truly understand the roots of this, and you're of age, go and watch that. If you're a little bit queasy, maybe just ask somebody who's in the know, and that's probably enough.
Know your limits and be prudent, because this is really dark stuff. So yeah, anyway, there was something else I thought of, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. Let's move on.
Sure, yeah.
Argument is becoming, because we've talked about it, we've had people ask us, do you think gay marriage was the slippery slope to what they're doing now? And
Probably.
I'm like, but I disagree. I'm like, when we say like, look, like as you mentioned, you and your husband are off doing your own thing and you're on a farm in the middle of nowhere, like I don't care about that. Like you should have the rights and access. And I've had that position my whole life when it came to the gay marriage question. Just because something happens and then another thing happens doesn't mean that one is the fault of the other, right? Well, because that argument is what they use to try and ban guns. They say, oh, when more people have guns, you see more gun death. And it's like, well, okay, sure, but that doesn't mean you don't have the rights. I'm not going to take away someone's right to keep and bear arms because some people do bad things. We ban those bad things, get rid of it. We protect the good things.
I don't know that.
I find it really interesting that he doesn't see the correlation between gay marriage and this. I thought Tim is a pretty smart guy.
He is a smart guy. I don't know if he's fully thought it through because, again, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. He, growing up in a very philosophically bad culture, it's kind of like, where are you really going to get a lot of formation, even though this is one of those areas where it's very much so just reason tells you what's going on. But just to point out something that he mentioned, I don't know if you guys in the chat have heard this argument before, but it's I'll touch on it very briefly. But he uses the phrase like that they have a right to, right? And there's and I talked a little bit about that in the video that's here on the channel called "Error Has No Rights." And so if you want a more fuller treatment, go back and watch that video. It's a couple live streams ago. But long story short, according to both Aristotle and the Catholic Church, you only have the right, and Aristotle gets things wrong practically, so let's just stick with the church. You only have the right to do that which is morally correct, with that which is in conformity with reason. So as an example, to use a little bit of language example, you have the ability to lie, but you don't have the right to lie. A right means something that you're entitled to in a certain context. There's a lot you could say about a right, but you're not entitled to lie, but you obviously, because of free will, you shouldn't, but you can lie. So when he uses this argument and he says, well, they have the right question should be is, where do rights come from?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to say the state, then I'd say, well, you can't rationally get angry at any time the government does something. You know what I'm saying? Like, where does it come from?
Totally. Mm-hmm.
And then two, you have to ask yourself the question of, where do rights come from? And then two, what is a right? Is it in conformity with reason? Is it conformity with just moral and natural truth? And that's a problem. So he uses that analogy when it comes to firearms. If you guys watched the show this morning, you guys know definitely not a fan of restrictions on any type of firearms. That's just me personally. But yeah, I don't think there's not really a correlation between self-defense, which self-defense, preventing destruction from an oppressive government, and two gentlemen who are in a quote unquote marriage unable to have children. You know what I'm saying? Like, those just don't correlate in my mind, at least on how I see it. So,
well, and I think going back to common questions and responses, of course, a lot of people will say, well, what's so different, for example, about a couple who is naturally infertile? How is that more moral and just? Why isn't that akin to two men or two women? And it's obviously not. It's intellectually lazy, because we understand and recognize that that's something outside of the natural order, like not outside of the natural order, but there's something wrong. Like, we acknowledge that there's something unhealthy there, because a couple naturally, when all things are properly ordered and working, they're going to naturally have children. And it's a huge cross for most couples if they're unable to naturally have children. So I just think that's really an important distinction to make, because we can see very clearly that a male body simply just, it doesn't make sense without its female counterpart, and vice versa. Like, our bodies literally don't make sense without each other. And like it's like super basic, right? And so that's something we can point to, is just saying they literally don't make sense without the other. They're complementary. That's what it means. But sometimes I think we just don't think about it, or people today aren't thinking that deeply about our bodies being different and complementary, working together for something.
Yeah, fully agree.
Okay, I'll go on. And sorry if Veronica was loud, and if she's loud again. She's really having a rough time today.
It's gay marriage itself. I think it's the corporate, the money around lobbying for gay marriage. Like, once that victory was achieved, we had to then take all of this momentum that we had and turn it into something else that we could sell and make money off of. And that benefited the medical industry that pushes trans ideology. It benefits corporations like Target that can sell you a rainbow t-shirt and say, like, look, I support you, and drag you back in. I don't know that it's like the legal issue, but I do think it's that all of the momentum that it had to go somewhere. And someone was like, I have decided I'm going to steer the ship in this crazy direction, and they will follow.
I think if you're a communist, you're never satiated. And so they won, quote unquote.
What do you think about that?
So
just
true.
A brief comment.
It's so incredibly true. Communism is a monster that can never be satiated, because it's all about control, and it's all about the destruction of traditional values and understandings of things. And I would, and though I would not agree with her, the lady, her name's Hannah. She's a great lady, I think, overall. I don't necessarily agree with her, but I do agree with the portion where she's talking about how a lot of this is, of course, rooted in money.
Driven by money, yeah.
I don't actually believe most of the people in these corporations are like, yay, rah, rah, I have all these ideological beliefs. I think a lot of them are just like, if the shoe was on the other foot, they would totally do it for money. You know what I'm saying? It's really about money. And that's, again, why it shows the veracity of sacred scripture when St. Paul writes, like, the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Or all kinds of evil, as some translations say. It's so true. You know, as my dad says, follow the money if you want to see the corruption of something. It all goes back to money, whether it's big wars, right? These never endless wars that we typically get into, or censorship, or just nonsensical stuff.
I was going to say this too, and it's true. Capitalism is they're assessing the market and trying to capitalize on something that they think will sell well.
Yeah, and it's true. And this is why it's interesting, because I would call myself a capitalist, but I think that capitalism, as it's currently practiced, like well, we don't technically have unbridled free market.
Mm-hmm.
We have high regulation, but capitalism without morals is a major problem. But those morals, again, cannot be these abstract things which any society just decides to impose on people. It has to go back to a root source, which is, where do rights come from? Where do morals come from? So capitalism, in my opinion, has to be only regulated by rational morals. So, like, yes, you can't sell human beings. That's a problem. Things along that nature. You cannot sell pornography. You cannot sell immorality, things that are going to be damaging to the soul.
Well, and that's something that's really interesting, because a lot of these issues that we're dealing with today do have to do with the commodification of human beings, whether it's abortion, you have a high rate of eugenics, IVF and surrogacy, also directly related to gay marriage and couples having a natural desire for children, but not doing the natural thing to have children. And some of these things are all tied together, because at the root of it, it is a fundamental question of, who am I and what am I made for? What is my purpose? And how do I live according to God's plan? So, it's just that very root question of the nature of the human person. So, yeah, let's move on, because I feel like we're
victory. I'm sure you think it was a victory. They won the victory of gay marriage, but like that wasn't it. It was like, what's next? And it's the same with like the green movement. They never were like, well, we got that, so now we're done. It's like, nope. The same with the guns, right? We got our loopholes, not enough. What's the next one? What's the next? I think the left is never satiated with they don't ever have one victory. One victory just leads to a greater one. And I agree with you. I think like marriage, like, should people, whatever, you can argue, we can all disagree, and that's wonderful. But no one was like, all right, we're all done. Everyone should close up shop.
But look,
we're done. It's like, no, we're not.
View,
now we want the next thing.
I think guns is a good analog to this. I think we need more constitutional carry across the board. I think people that use guns to kill the innocent are evil and must be stopped. So my view is like, individuals have their rights, but just because you have access to something doesn't mean it's your fault that another person did something bad. So if there are groomers and abusers trying to come into this space, I'm not going to blame two guys on a farm minding their own business.
Well,
thank you.
So
it's not your fault.
What I would say is I agree. It's kind of ironic, because Tim says he doesn't believe the slippery slope started with gay marriage, and you were arguing that it probably did. I would actually push it back before that. And so what I believe, and I believe we've talked about this when you were on the show before, but I'm Catholic. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I also believe that sex is supposed to be unitive and procreative. And when we as a society decided that we were going to accept the normalization of artificial contraceptive methods, we basically pushed this giant boulder down the hill that was going to entirely interrupt and subvert our understanding of human sexuality and what it is. And so,
well said. I love that the camera panned to the gentleman that was talking when we opened up, when he said, I'm Catholic and I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, and the camera just quick looked at him like, how's he responding? And then went back to him, went back to Seamus. I'm guessing this is Seamus.
Yeah, no, this is Seamus. Shout out to Seamus. Seamus is awesome. Every time I listen to Tim Cast, he's one of the current current hosts that's on there often. But he's fantastic. He not just from religious views, but political views as well. His political takes are great, but he's absolutely right. I mean, again, like as we've been saying all tonight, when you separate the primary purpose of human sexuality from what it's for, what it's made for, then anything is permissible. Because as St. Thomas says, when he talks about this issue, he labels these issues under what he calls the unnatural vice. And he's not saying unnatural. He's saying unnatural in the sense that, like, while all sin is unnatural, right, because we're made for God, this is unnatural in the context of you cannot procure children. And so he says, like, this is something that's very grave, because whether it's contraception or homosexuality, right, or things along that nature, it is essentially, in a certain sense, this is my translation, but kind of like playing God, like determining when they're going to use that procreative power. And so therefore it's an injustice, a grave injustice against God, because we're taking that order of procreative nature and flip-flopping it. So yeah, no, I fully agree, right? We have no republic in the absence of immoral people. That's something that we have to understand. I get called an Americanist all the time by my haters. I'm not an Americanist at all. But there's a lot that our founding fathers get right and wrong, but a lot of them are absolutely right when it comes to their understandings of our nation. Like, we actually have to be a moral people if we're going to survive. And that's not unique to them. You'll find that in traditional catechisms all the time. It's like God will bless a nation when it follows after him, and he will obviously chastise a nation when it's not. And one of the ways he chastises it is he allows the people to get really divided.
Yeah.
There you go.
And here we are.
Yeah.
A lot of people will say, well, this is the moment where we started rolling down the slippery slope, or this is where we should have stopped. But my point is, as soon as that happened, we had pushed the boulder and it wasn't going to stop until we tried to turn it around and reverse everything.
I don't know. I just think, as I stated, if there's some basic question of two people who want to mind their own business, I'm fine with it.
Such a
Really interesting.
I don't hate on Tim. This is not a diss on Tim, but in my opinion,
A little bit. It's a little bit of a diss.
Yeah, I remember.
Come on.
Well, I wasn't even thinking. Yeah,
It's just intellectually lazy. It's lazy.
I remember when I heard it live, I just thought, wow, this just doesn't really have any substance arguing back, because you really can't. Like, again, I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's just like, after what we've gone through, how can you refute this just basic question?
Yep.
If someone then tries to use that to then do something evil, we just say no. We recognize the difference.
But
but then I guess you and I, we just fundamentally disagree over what's evil.
Well, I certainly think too, when it came to the question of gay marriage, this is back, what was it, Proposition 8 in California? Was a big thing or whatever?
They voted against it. Judges.
There was that famous line from Jack Black where he was like pretending to be Jesus on stage, and he says, "Your nation was built on separation of church and state." And I was confused because I was like, isn't that an argument against gay marriage? Like, if marriage is a religious institution, then wouldn't you be in fact arguing for civil unions and not marriage by saying that? I never understood. But my position always was equal rights or whatever. But I do certainly understand this does lead. I do believe gay marriage led to the question of polyamory and polygamy and things like that, because then you start asking more questions about what defines the limitations of whether or not someone has the right to tax benefits and access, and why would it be limited to only one other person?
The one I'm seeing a lot right now is just good friends who get married, and they're like, but I really they're my life partner. Like, I like them more than anyone else. And
okay, so I love this because it really highlights what marriage is properly ordered towards. It's ordered towards children. It's not just like, oh, I really like you. I mean, you can hear Veronica probably. That's what it's ordered to.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And what I'm trying, this is where I'm just interested, because like Tim on the one hand asserts that they should have a right, but then it's like he also admits that it opened up the door to, polyamory, polygamy, and all these other things. And again, these questions are like, do those people have rights to do those? And then what is a right, and where do rights come from? It is a slippery slope one way or another, because when you take something as massive and fundamental to the human species as marriage, and then just kind of upend it, you're going to have consequences. Short answer, what my thoughts on libertarianism and liberalism. So I am an old school conservative, right? You could call me a traditionalist conservative, or more commonly in America, it's called a paleoconservative. And so I believe that fundamentally America should be rooted on conservative values, meaning like values rooted in Christianity and in morals, as well as in good old-fashioned Southern agrarian, localism, if you will. When it comes to elements of libertarianism and liberalism, I can appreciate elements, because there's obviously elements of truth in every single ideology. So as an example, I do appreciate, to a degree, and this again, appreciate libertarians, there's in a certain sense staunch resistance to what they see as corrupt government, and there's, I think, an absolute place for that. However, I don't agree with them philosophically that everyone is kind of just their own island and therefore should just take their own personal responsibility. I do see us as social beings who are all connected to each other. So I don't see how it philosophically works. And then when it comes to liberalism, to make it brief and short, there's a lot of problems with it that when we look at the context of what the church has taught, obviously the popes Have not said the nicest of things. I'm not blaming the popes, so I would agree with them. Haven't said the nicest of things. There's elements of liberalism which you can maybe, in a certain sense, appreciate. So I think like a moderated form of freedom of speech is okay, but I don't believe that man has, again, that unbridled freedom or right to it, because again, it goes back to what is a right. You don't have the right to blaspheme God. You don't have the right to deceive people, but do you have the right to say something that is maybe contrary to a certain culture's social norms? Sure, yeah, if it's in the context of the pursuit of truth. I'm saying like that, it's more nuanced. And so I'd say I'm not either. I'm an old school conservative in that respect, but I would not cancel someone for having those views. I would absolutely dialogue and talk with them and easily go on a show like this. And that's why I like Timcast. It's a great show.
Oh, I was gonna hit play. There we
They've
go.
been in my life longer, so why would I get married to someone I'm dating versus just like my best friend forever?
Well-
and that is another question about unions, right?
Supposed to be what marriage was.
if
Well,
we're
yeah.
in a post-marriage society,
Yeah.
That's
are
so
we allowed to?
weird.
Well,
I'm seeing this more and more all the time.
The entire reason that we decided as a society collectively to keep track, at least at the government level, of who is getting married is because we wanted to know who was accountable for which children and also who were making children. That was the point of it, as something that was enshrined legislatively. And so once you move outside of that, and this is why I've mentioned, I think this starts with contraceptives, because then you no longer believe that marriage is about having children, about having a family. And so then it can basically become about anything after that point. You just totally broadened the definition. And I think it's impossible after that to come to a point and say like, well, this is where we're going to stop it. You've already opened that Pandora's box. Like you no longer have that reason-based definition of what it's for, and you either have to turn around and do away with all of it, or you're just going to get more of it. And this is something that like straight people will get mad at me for too, because they'll say, well, you're criticizing contraceptives. And I think one argument that was made by a lot of gay rights activists during the 90s through 2010s, when this was much more hot button issue, was, well, conservatives actually are not living and walking the walk when it comes to this stuff, because they are using contraceptives and they are getting divorced. And that's actually true. That was one of the things that I believed opened the door for all of this.
I feel like it's like weird. It's like telepathic. We've talked about so much of this, and it's so nice to hear him put it in his own words, because it's true. He's spot on. And I think anyone who is going to be even remotely consistent in their thought is going to draw the same conclusions if we're starting from the same premise and asking the same questions.
Yeah, no, fully agree. I mean, all my comments on it are short and sweet. Couldn't agree more with what he said. I mean, conservatives have to walk the walk, and they really have to get back to these philosophical roots, and they can't be just like, I mean, I would hear all the time people would be like, oh, you're against homosexuality, but you're on your fourth wife. How is that consistent? And I'm like, that's a fair question. You actually have to be consistent and say, what is a family? It's a man and a woman for life, right? For the purpose of, rearing and
Educating. Yep.
Educating children.
Yep.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I think intuitively, I feel like people know that and understand it because it comports with human experience, right? For the most part. I mean, we're all broken. Our experiences are different. But at the end of the day, there's just no denying how nature works. And that's not to say that things always are right, like infertility or things like that. There are things that go wrong in nature because of the fall. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't change God's plan for humanity or what he intended.
Yeah, no, fully agree.
No, Ipo Rose, I don't have time.
She is a saintly mother. She doesn't have time to be on YouTube all the time.
I can't. I used to listen to Pints all the time, and I like it.
Watch this one Thomas channel now.
Yeah. I literally don't listen to anybody. I'm the worst. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think conservatives have to start owning their share in this problem. I think that's what I'm taking away from this is like conservatives, we have to own this. It's not, and that's where I see kind of the downfall of libertarianism. It's too extreme in its perspective that people are their own island, and it's very relativistic. It leads to a lot of the same conclusions that liberals actually believe. With a more conservative veneer. So
Boy, Paul VI would be so happy right now.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, he's listening.
Vitae,
So
yeah, Saint Paul VI.
He's really very excited. Nice job. Nice.
No, it's true, and he said all
done.
that. Yeah, thank you.
He did.
He said basically all of
60
it.
years ago.
Yeah, it's very prophetic. Yeah.
I wonder,
Humane vitae.
the main issue for me was always about equal rights and access, not the definition of a family. I actually thought that if marriage is done in churches and in temples and synagogues and it's viewed widely as like a religious function in this country, then there's a separation of church and state. And for the government to mandate a church provide a ceremony or whatever would seemingly be a violation.
Does Tim not understand what separation of church and state means?
I think he has a somewhat limited degree from it because, again, his background that he's coming from is very much so. He was kind of a quasi-socialist.
I can tell.
A good amount of time, but he's not socialist at all. He's very much so what you would just kind of call a classical disenfranchised liberal today. So I mean,
Interesting.
yeah,
Because I'm actually kind of unimpressed. Like, that's not what the fathers meant when they wrote the Constitution and they wrote the Declaration. When they were talking about God and his role in forming the country, it wasn't separation. Like, these two things are isolated and they're not. They're mutually exclusive. It's like no. These things are you just can't be a theocracy. Like, can't.
I don't understand. So I don't know. I'll give him at least the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I don't know how much he's being exposed to. I mean. But yeah, I mean, it again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's like, again, I just don't think he's really thought these things through on the hard and natural philosophical
Very
level.
interesting.
Of that.
Yeah, well, this is
Oh,
Christianization. I was going to say this is what we talk about with a post-Christian nation. Obviously, the state realized the vital importance of marriage, that they adopted it, and it became a state thing. The question is, should it still be a state thing? And I would argue it should. There's a value to the family. There's a value to moms and dads and keeping track of children. And it used to be for the purity of the bloodline also, that we weren't making sure that you were marrying your first cousin or et cetera, et cetera. That was a very important role of it. But the state has adopted principles of religion because it was valuable for society. It's very much, even from the secular point of view, someone like Thomas Jefferson, one of our great Virginians, as a proud Virginian now, I'll say, wasn't himself particularly Christian, same with Ben Franklin, but realized the benefit in society.
Yeah.
So what happens when we become post-Christian is we throw away all of that and we think society is going to continue as it is, and it's not. It's the same as if we get rid of the same as we're trying to adopt a smartphone. Kids have been the same for 5,000, 10,000, 150,000 years, and now kids are totally different because of this little device, and we can't adopt fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hacks your brain. But I just want to mention, because you brought up Paul VI, and you're right. But I just want to mention this. Usually, when I'll make these arguments, I'll get hit with, "You're arguing from a Catholic perspective or making a religious argument." True that I'm Catholic, but you'll notice I did not invoke divine revelation at all.
Yeah, that was Daniel.
Yeah, that was you.
That's his
but no. There's nothing wrong with that.
Can't get through one show without Catholicism.
No. I just want to mention this. When I give that explanation, I'm speaking like from the perspective of what makes sense for a functioning society. I'm not. I at no point said, well, the reason we have to do it this way is because when two baptized Christians get married and have a sacramental marriage and they're trying to get each other to heaven. I believe all of that's true, but my argument from this is from a perspective of, well, why is the government looking at this in the first place?
Yeah.
And there are plenty of non-religious reasons for that.
And we are not a healthy society. And I love that you said that. I'm looking at this for what is a healthy society. And what I find one of the more fascinating things to do is go back and look at surveys that have been done for 20, 40, 50, 100 years of happiness, of depression levels. And every single survey shows that we are less happy, we are more depressed, we are not a healthy society right now.
Do you agree with
way?
Do you agree with Seamus's interpretation of the purpose of family and
Absolutely.
requirement? But how do you reconcile that?
That's for God is going to ask me that question one day, because it doesn't make any sense. I'm a total contradiction, but I agree with him 100%. I grew up Catholic. I realize what I am living right now is not in accordance with my.
Wow.
This is when my mouth dropped. He, as a homosexual individual, admits that it makes no sense. Because again, this is an argument that we all, talking to you guys in the chat, have to understand, is that this is a natural law issue. Of course, right? It comes from God, but as Aquinas says, right, the author of Revelation is also going to be the author of reason, right? It's not going to be contradicting one another. And so we have to understand that, this gentleman is starting to, he knows in his conscience that
Mm-hmm.
we separate the procreative act from as being the purpose of marriage, then it just all falls apart and it just doesn't make any sense anymore. It is like saying, that at the end of the day, what you should do is if you want to change your light bulb, you should, I don't know, put a book up there and see if it lights on fire or something. Like it's disordered. It makes no sense. And so this is why we have to understand when it comes to these things.
Well, and I think that's why, kind of moving back to this theme of hope, at least where we're at in the church right now and in the culture, and just the church being so completely juxtaposed to the culture. I think a lot of people are waking up right now and they're being convicted because of the dead ends. They're experiencing these dead ends and they're being challenged like this man here. It's like, I see it in my own life, like where the Lord is convicting people's hearts and he's drawing them gently but firmly back to the truth. And that's why I think when we have these conversations, the fire and brimstone isn't, I mean, maybe it can be appropriate. I'm not going to say it's never going to be appropriate, but being in relationship with one another and having honest conversations. And I think that's something I really appreciate about this clip that you showed is, could people normally have a conversation like that without people getting just enraged? It's like impossible.
You'd think not with how much people, I mean, college students act on campuses or what you just see online. You'd think that like everybody that you talked about this issue, it's just, guns a-blazing immediately. But in reality, like there is a way of just sitting down across the table, as Seamus wonderfully did, and just witness to him. And notice how he wasn't belligerent against him, wasn't calling him names, but he also did not like kowtow or hide his beliefs. He out of the gate said, I am Catholic. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, and then proceeded into reason. It was
very well done. And I think people naturally have more respect for people who aren't afraid to be convicted and are not going to acquiesce to pressure, even just the slightest bit of pressure people give today. And we can't be Christians that give on this issue. We have to be firm and loving. And I think there's a way to do that without being hurtful, like we just saw with Seamus. But we also too have to be open to hearing people's stories. And I think giving space for people to express why they feel like this is appropriate, because at the end of the day, when they start to be convicted of the truth, you can only go one of two ways. You can either be convicted of truth, and at some point when you've finally had enough, you've had full conviction, then the will assents and you change your life, and it usually happens incrementally, or you change your beliefs so that you don't have to change your behavior. And so I think we need to pray long and hard about, I guess we're playing with printer ink, but we have to pray long and hard for these people like this man here who is convicted of the truth, knows what the truth is, and it makes sense. It comports with his intellect and capacity for reason. And we just hope that he makes that really hard decision, because, oh my goodness, how hard would it be to have founded your whole life on this? Everything that they have is wrapped up in this, and to walk away from it, kind of like Milo, I've seen commented in here, Milo Yiannopoulos. That's a really hard thing to do. And so praying for these people and being a kind, firm, constant witness to the truth is how we're going to bring back people to truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah, no, fully agree. As we wrap up, everyone, thanks for hanging out with us, I guess. Make sure and like this video, share,
please,
subscribe, share. That's definitely the big thing. I'm going to play an interview for just a second, because I'm always the one who gets asked this question, but I'm going to ask Angela, what do you have coming up on your show? Do not leave until she has said her piece. So what do you have?
Thanks. Yeah. So, like I said, I did say earlier, I had a great interview published with Dr. Mary Eberstadt about the sexual revolution. There's Veronica, everyone's favorite. Also, you might have to go first anyway.
I was like, I can always go first.
You go.
No worries. So my show, as you guys know, the Traditional Thomist, upcoming on my show is going to be, I'm wrapping up a series that I haven't gotten to in a couple months, but I'm going to be wrapping up, kind of putting to bed all of the more spicy stuff when it comes to liturgical matters inside of the church. I'm finishing up just my series on my kind of intellectual critique of the new rite of Mass, mainly because one, I think it's a good critique, but then two, that's not the purpose or the goal of my show. My show is mainly a show which is trying to expose people to Thomism, and now is also kind of transitioning into being more of a show that talks about social commentary from a Catholic political perspective. So yeah, if you're interested in anything that is related in that world, head on over to the Traditional Thomist. And you can also follow me on Instagram under that same title, as well as if you go, you'll also be able to just find my personal account, Nicholas Cavazos. And you might get more spicy stuff on the latter, believe it or not, I think on my personal account. I don't even know if Angela follows me on my personal account.
Well, geez, I need to find you. I'm going to find you.
Uh-huh. So yeah, but that's what I got.
Sweet. Yeah. So now that Veronica is content for like 5 seconds, one thing I wanted to point out too is I had a really great interview with my friend Mark Robertson from the Trad Men about spiritual fatherhood in the face of infertility. And for those of you, maybe Father's Day was rough yesterday, especially if you're dealing with infertility, check it out. It's an amazing interview. We've had a lot of feedback from people who are so grateful because men don't often get their voice heard in the infertility issue. So that was a really important interview to me. And I'm actually going to be interviewing Devin Schatt from St. Joseph's. What is his apostolate? It has to do with St. Joseph. We're going to be talking about fatherhood on a cultural and spiritual level. Fathers of St. Joseph or something.
I forget, but I know exactly the individual you're talking about.
Yeah. I'm really, really excited about this interview. Keith Nestor put me in touch with him, and yeah, it's going to be awesome because I know that he's got a heart for helping men be better fathers. And that's something we desperately need right now. So please head on over to my channel, Integrated with Angela Erickson, subscribe, do all the things. I'm kind of on Twitter. I'm taking a little bit of a break, but I'm on Twitter a lot of the time. Otherwise, Instagram, and you can check out my website as well, which should be linked in the description. So I don't know if that's all, then I guess we'll just head on out, but we're excited. Thanks for joining us again on the Assent for the Meaning of Catholic, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.